am Dr. B. I am here with Dr. P today. Welcome to this week's episode of Point Counterpoint. And we've got an interesting topic to talk to you about today. This came up a lot as a topic of discussion on my headache wellness retreat last week in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. And that is the issue of fat. What should we do about fat intake for our brain? And I feel like we're getting all this conflicting information. Some people are saying, yeah, go keto for your migraines and eat lots of fat and saturated fats. And other people are saying, no, that increases the risk of stroke. And then other people are saying, yeah, but fats are good for the brain. The brain is made of fat. It is just so confusing.
Yeah, this is definitely something that I get questions on all the time. And some of the diets out there that can potentially work, I think they work for other reasons than being super high in fats. And so keto is always one that's concerning because it can be really hard on the kidneys. Same thing with like the carnivore diet. Some of those can be really sketchy diets, depending on how they're done. So I think it's a great topic.
Yeah, I totally agree because I think that there are some people out there who are being hurt in an attempt to heal their headaches. They are literally making their health worse. So let's first of all talk about the different kinds of fats, just so we're all on the same page about like what's good fat, what's bad fat, what are these terms even? Dr. P, you want to help us out with that?
You bet. Yeah. So we're not going to really go into the omega-3 and omega-6s and things that we kind of talked about that a couple weeks ago. So if you're interested in that information, you can check out our point counterpoint on the omega-3s. But when we're talking about like the trans fat, saturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, monounsaturated, I mean, there's so many. So you can essentially break it down into two fat categories. There's the saturated fats and there's the unsaturated fats. And then you've got subcategories under there. The saturated fat, the easiest way to think about it is that it's solid at room temperature. So, think about butter, a big pat, it's just solid versus, coconut oil when it's above like 75 degrees, right? It's melted. But at room temperature, it's still solid. So those are saturated fats versus like your avocado oil or your, canola oil or something like that. Those are going to be unsaturated because you pull it out and you pour it. You don't have to heat it or melt it or anything like that. So that's the easiest way to think about it. And then you have your unsaturated fats, which are broken down into polyunsaturated and monounsaturated. And there's actually some interesting studies about polyunsaturated fats and brain health. So really good for migraineurs. This is where fish and omega-3s come in. Omega-3s are polyunsaturated fats. And so those can be really good for cognition, for migraine care, for anti-inflammation. But then you also have saturated fats, which can be helpful in moderation. So when we're talking about keto, a lot of times people think keto diet, they're not actually truly keto. Keto means like you're actually monitoring your ketones to make sure you're in ketosis, which is different than a high fat, low carb diet, which what most people mean by keto. When they say they're keto, they're not monitoring ketones, they're just eating a high fat diet. And so this is where you have to be careful because it's not the same thing. A keto diet is not the same as a high fat diet necessarily, although they can be similar, but it's a matter of how your body is responding. And so if you're not monitoring it and you're just doing a high fat diet, that can lead to some problems. And in fact, I think Dr. Barrett, you were telling me a story of a conversation you had with somebody. You want to share that story? It was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was talking to somebody a while back who was advised to do more of a carnivore keto type of diet. But what was happening is that this person's cholesterol was going up into the 300s. It wasn't there before. And now, as we move through life, a cholesterol of 300 is still associated with a higher risk of heart attack and stroke. Okay, I want to be very clear. There is no discussion in the conventional medicine community about that. It is accepted as fact, pretty much. Now, you can say, well, does 170 or 180 matter? That's fine to have those discussions. But when it gets to a certain point, there's no doubt that you are increasing your risk of those vascular events. So I just want to make sure everybody's totally aware of that fact. So cholesterol still matters. I think where people get confused is that cholesterol in your diet doesn't increase cholesterol in your bloodstream. Weird, right? You would think that it was, because like eggs are high in cholesterol. And so what we've learned is that eating a lot of eggs does not increase your cholesterol, which is odd. You would think that it would. If you're eating a lot, it should go up. It doesn't. What increases your cholesterol is saturated fat. Saturated fat goes up, cholesterol goes up. Saturated fat goes down, cholesterol goes down. Does that make sense? So that is really the variable that we need to control. And I'm so glad you gave us that super easy description for how to distinguish saturated from unsaturated fats, because there isn't very much to learn then, right? It's just things from animal sources or things that are solid at room temperature. Those are the things that are going to increase your cholesterol and increase your chance of stroke. So there are many ways to go keto without increasing that saturated fat. So for example, you can eat a lot of olive oil, you can eat a lot of avocados, you can eat a lot of nuts and seeds. I'm not saying you have to eat low fat. Like that can vary a lot depending on what your goals are. And if you want to try high fat keto, please just do it with more unsaturated sources. I think so many times keto is like a license to eat cheese on everything
You know
and
how often
bacon
I've
on
heard,
everything.
"Oh, yeah, I have bacon like 4 times a day." I'm like, "Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's not the right way to do it. Don't do that. It sounds amazing, but don't do that."
Yeah, it's yummy, but that's keto done wrong. I think most people who are really good at keto and big proponents of keto for brain health, which there's some merit to that, there really is, but most of them are not saying do it with saturated fat. I think
Now,
most of them are saying do it with healthy fats.
can I clarify with you when you're saying keto? Because I hear this all the time, and for my own understanding, I want to know what your definition of a keto diet is. Are you talking about actually getting into ketosis, or are you talking about a high fat, low grain diet?
Both.
Okay.
Both. So, but I think you can use healthy sources of fats to do that. And I think that for most people with migraine, we need grains. We need the vitamins and
Yes.
minerals that come from not brains. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Please don't eat brains.
No, don't eat brain.
We need the vitamins and minerals that come from grains. We need the healthy things that are in things like sweet potatoes and quinoa and beans. We need the fiber. Like we really need those things for our beans, for our brains. So I think that eating keto 24/7 all the time for weeks at a time is not optimal for brain health, because you need, and if you want to keep it to once a day when you eat your carbs, that's fine. But you need to give yourself some of those plant-based carbs that are nutrient dense, as well as fiber. I mean, gut health is an integral part of brain health, and you have to feed those good bacteria with fiber, and that's beans and vegetables. So, you want to feed those guys so that your gut brain axis stays healthy. And that means you're going to take in some carbs. So if you want to decide to eat one carb meal a day and stay keto for all your other meals, that is totally fine for brain health. But I would say that full on keto for weeks at a time is not good for brain health.
I would love to like step in here and just mention that, because I know there's somebody watching that is going to be like, I can't eat any of those foods. Like if I do, it's a guaranteed migraine. That tells us something. That tells us something about what's going on with your migraines, because there's a gut issue happening, that your gut flora is not compatible with those grains. And there's a reason for that. Don't know what it is. I can't tell you that part, but that needs to be investigated. So I just think that's super important. If you're listening to this and you're like, I can't eat grains at all, period, even though they're supposed to be good for me, because grains will support our serotonin, which we know is highly implicated in many, many people with migraines. And so it is really important. And I see that most of our clients don't do well on a low grain diet, but there are a handful who do. They can't have grains, or it will trigger them, or vegetables will trigger them. There's another issue going on, and it stems from the gut. So that is the next place for you guys to start. Little sidetrack, but I just wanted, that's super important information for you guys to know.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah, that's really good for people to know. So, one other thing I wanted to touch on, you're kind of reminding me of that, is the reason that, like, let's say there's a 20-year-old listening to this who's like, I don't have to worry about heart attack and stroke right now. All I want to do is fix my headaches. And if that takes keto, then I'll do it. But what I want to point out is that many, many people with migraines have what's called microvascular ischemia. So if you imagine the blood vessels in your brain as being like a tree, okay, there's a trunk and then it branches out, into all little branches. what happens for so many people is those little branches become occluded and they become what we call white matter lesions on MRI. Now,
So
we are trained.
occluded is a fancy word for saying
Oh,
blocked, just in case someone doesn't know that.
yes, exactly, exactly. They become blocked, okay? And it's like the world's tiniest stroke, little itty bitty, little microscopic, but it's basically the same thing happening. The blood vessel goes from being open to being blocked off, and then the area of brain that that little tiny microscopic blood vessel was supplying dies off, and it becomes what we call a white matter lesion, small vessel ischemia, microvascular ischemia, small vessel disease, an area of gliosis. Well, sometimes not that, but there are lots of different terms that can be used to describe it on MRIs. And we, as neurologists, are trained to tell people, don't worry, that's just your migraines. It doesn't mean anything. But I think it does. I don't think we necessarily want to be losing that millimeter of brain tissue. Like I need every cell I can get.
Amen to that.
I don't need any fewer. And so I just want to make sure that people know that if you do have those little white spots on your MRI, eating saturated fats is going to make that worse. And that is just not what you want. You don't want anything in your daily habits that's going to exacerbate a problem that you may already have a tendency to get. So, yes, I think it's particularly important for those of us with migraine because of that.
I totally
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
So then what can we eat? What should we be focusing on?
So I would say the no-brainers. We are so on the brain thing today.
We are.
The no, I would say that the no-brainers are things like olive oil, flaxseed oil, nuts, seeds, any vegetable source of oil, all completely fine. Have as much as you want, as long as it doesn't make your weight unhealthy, your metabolic health unhealthy. Oh, you know what we didn't talk about? Coconut oil. Now there's an interesting one. Yeah.
Mhm.
So coconut oil is a saturated fat, but it is less of a saturated fat. So it's what's called a medium chain triglyceride. Now, your body can convert medium chain triglycerides into ketones really easily. People actually take a derivative of coconut oil called MCT oil to help put their body into ketosis, and it works. I've tried it. I have the ketone meters. I've done it where I take the MCT oil, check my ketones before and after, like the whole thing. Like it really does. And ketones are good for the brain. There's no doubt about that. But I think that the jury is still out on coconut oil a little bit because it is still a saturated fat. It is not as damaging as other ones for sure. So, for example, if you have a choice between making a sauce with cream versus coconut oil, definitely go for the coconut oil. Definitely, definitely. No doubt there. But should you be drinking, a cup of it every day? Probably not. It's maybe not as healthy for you as other sources of fat like, the avocados, olives, et cetera, et cetera.
Fish.
Yeah. Oh, talking about fish. What were you going to say there?
Oh, no, I was just saying fish, again, kind of going back to our conversation from a few weeks ago of the omega-6, omega-3s. And we can tie that into the saturated fat as well, right? Because saturated fat comes from, animal products. And when I think of like a nice, juicy, fatty, yummy steak, like that's a pretty good saturated fat example, right? This is where the omega-3, omega-6 plays a huge role because when we have conventionally grown beef that's just like at the stockyard and then, the mass slaughtering that happens for the conventional beef, that's very, very high in omega-6. So that's going to be like the worst possible saturated fats that you can have. But like our family are carnivores. We love meats. Like we probably go a little overboard, but we make sure that it's all grass-fed, free-range, organic from a local farmer who, does it all right. And when we cook our steak, it actually smells like fish. So you can smell I know it's amazing. You can smell the omega-3s in it. And so I feel less bad about eating a ton of that meat because I know that my fats are going to be, high in the anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids. So you can get some healthier versions of saturated fats that can be anti-inflammatory and brain healthy, but you need to work at it. It's not something you can go pick up at the store. Like, you have to go find somebody who does it properly. So, lots of different things to think about. If you are a meat eater lover like I am, and you want to have that juicy steak like a couple times a week, you need to make sure you're doing it right. You don't have to eliminate that delicious food. You just need to make sure that it's got the nutrition in it that your body needs and is not setting you up for ill health.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that that's, far healthier than having, bacon with nitrites and nitrates
Yep.
and sausages with all those, again, with all the different additives in them, having a nice grass-fed steak is way, way, way healthier way to do it. Yeah, good point. Yeah, and fish too, fish is a great source of healthy fats. So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
just don't like fish that much. I even have trouble doing like fish once a week. And I know there are a lot of people like me out there. So I feel a little less guilty having my two steaks a month or a week, because I know like it smells like fish. So I know there's some good stuff. I know it's not as high, but
That's
give
good
and
to
take.
know. That's a really good tip for people for whom fish is just isn't a good solution.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then fish oil, of course, right?
Yeah.
My old standby supplement, like I take that regularly. So
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Me too. So important for brain health. All right, everybody. Hope that clears up the issue of fat and brain health and migraine. Thank you so much for joining us today. Dr. Pete, thank you for being here.
absolutely. See you next week.
Yeah. Have a good week, everybody. Bye bye.